welcome. This is Saturday News at noon. I'm your host, Keith Lander, coming to you from the Tabernacle Baptist Church right here in Dayton, Ohio. Thanks for all your response from the last show. Really appreciate it. Give me a thumbs up or just drop me a line. I'll make sure I see it and respond to it. Some of these things I don't know how to respond to. You give me one of those emoji things, I try to find out how you like it, but this technology, I'm trying to catch up with it. I'll get there in about 20 years from now. So just keep hitting it and I'll figure out how to respond back to you. But today's show, we got an interesting show. We got a very special guest, appreciate you, Mr. Michael Carter.
Glad to be with you, Keith. It's really good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And Michael Carter is the St. Clair Community College Chief Diversity Officer, and also he's the Senior Advisor to the school's president. Now, the reason why Michael's here is we're going to get into this critical race theory. I know you've heard that term all out in the news. You heard people oppose it. You heard people in support of it. We're going to clear the air, and we're going to simplify this thing so that you understand what is critical race theory. So if someone comes to you and say, hey, are you on board with critical race theory or not, you will have a educated response. And Michael, can you share with us this critical race theory? What is it? What's it all about?
Well, critical race theory is actually a term that is used to kind of define the history of this country in terms of the implications that racism has had on its people, and specifically in our case, for our purposes, black people, and how for 400 years race has been the instigator of so many negative things that have happened to black people and people of color in this country. So critical race theory, and you'll see different explanations from those who are the originators of it. But, you know, my take on critical race theory is, for example, when you talk about redlining, when you talk about slavery, when you talk about Jim Crow, and it examines the impact that it has had, those policies and laws have had on people of color in this country. And the fact that these were put in place have had negative implications, and we need to examine them and see how it has played a part in our history. And this isn't something to, it's something to make us more knowledgeable, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more later.
Okay, so why do you think some of these people are coming out against this critical race theory? Do they really understand what it's about?
They couldn't define it, but they understand that it's the truth. And the truth is scary to a lot of people because when these stories have been suppressed, it's more comfortable. And this whole notion that we are scaring and making little white children uncomfortable and scared is not only a ridiculous notion, but it's an insult in general. So people can't define what critical race theory is, but they know exactly what they're doing, and it is an effort to not have the true, the truth be told. And it's hypocrisy at its fullest. The same people, for example, the governor of Mississippi, when he set out to ban critical race theory, declared, and this is 2021, not 1950, declared April Confederate History Month and April 26th Confederate History Day. So it's sheer hypocrisy, because if you're talking about banning critical race theory and divisive things, that would be one of the first things that you should include in that bucket. But it's never what the issue is. It's akin, I think the visual, is like three-card Monte. Whatever you see is not what's really there. So that's the effort.
Yeah, so basically we're dealing with the truth in what happened throughout history leading up even to today. And so these people who are opposing the truth on what happened in history as it relates to African Americans. Is that right?
Well, it implicates America. People who oppose critical race theory, you don't see them opposing the teaching of the Holocaust because it doesn't embarrass America. It embarrasses Germany. So if they were genuine and you want to teach, wouldn't that be divisive according to their definition, which I think is ridiculous, but none of them complain about the teaching of the Holocaust.
Right.
So it's disingenuous at best.
Yeah. Now, where is this taught? Now, I was doing my research, for the show, and I couldn't find a high school, elementary school, even a preschool that teaches critical race theory. So if it's not taught in any of these schools I just mentioned, is it on a university level?
They have lumped everything that is uncomfortable about racism in America as critical race theory. So they've made this big bag so that they can just, try to put whatever they want in it. But critical race theory is typically taught not only, it's typically, in many cases, not taught in undergraduate. It's typically taught in grad school and in law school. And a lot of those students have trouble understanding it. So critical race theory, which was, established, the theory was about 1989. And it was by Derek Bell and others. It has never been intended to be something that we teach in elementary school, in high school, in middle school, and rarely is it taught in undergraduate.
Okay, so let me ask you this here. There was a lot of people opposed to the 1619 project, and I don't think a whole bunch of people even understand what is the 1619 project. And you had the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He got on Congress and making a statement about we're not going to teach 1619 project. Explain what is the 1619 project, if you can.
1619 project was, so New York Times oftentimes has excerpts. So 1619 project was an excerpt from the New York Times, which had Hannah Nicole Jones, had several writers contribute to this piece for the New York Times about the history of racism in this country and the impact that slavery has had, and then the domino effect of all these things. So there was an article about the reason when you travel to Atlanta and the traffic is bad, that was intentional, and it was based on on race and where people were segregated and things of that nature. So these implications that have had these laws and things that have had implications for us today talks about the sugar industry, our dependence on sugar. Is part of our history. So there were a number of articles, and whether anyone agrees completely with all these things, it is interesting, and I think something we've forgotten in America is this ability to put ideas and thoughts out there and have intelligent discussions about their merit and worth. So there was fear, and much of the 1619 project is eye-opening, is shocking. It talks about doctors, healthcare today, and how the beliefs about black bodies many years ago affect how doctors view black patients today, pain tolerance and all those things. So this was scary to people. And I think that when you hear something that you've never heard before, it's almost like the 5 stages of grief. The first stage is denial. So you don't want to believe that this is true. I think a lot of people who may not necessarily agree with everything, or disagree with everything, I should say. When you hear these, you're struck, because when you hear things for the first time, whatever it is, whether it's the Tulsa Race Massacre or Elaine, Arkansas, if you're not familiar with that, look that up. About 200 blacks were killed in a weekend in 1912, I believe. So these things happen, and you hear them for the first time, and you're examining, well, somebody I respected and loved didn't tell me this. So you go through the stage of denial. But the more and more of this is going to come out. One of the things that my brother and I, who's a historian, we were talking, and you know, critical race theory can be banned, but the genie's out of the bottle, and you can try to fight the 1619 Project, but the genie's out of the bottle, and we're not going back because we can possess our own stories. We can tell our own truths. Most of America didn't know about the Tulsa Race Massacre until recently, but they found it out, and it makes you wonder, you know, what else is out there. Just last week, there was a discussion about, you know, if you've ever been to Georgia, Lake Lanier. Lake Lanier sits on top of an all-black town that, you know, in Forsyth County, Georgia, where blacks, you know, about 11 or 1,200 blacks were run out of town in the early 1900s. And later, it was Oscarville, Georgia. Water was run over, you know, this property and land, and Lake Lanier sits on top of Oscarville. So all these things come out. So that's what's uncomfortable. The truth's being told. We have not had an opportunity to tell our story completely, and those days are over.
Now, would you agree that I heard this term cancel culture, that some of these people were out there rattling around about, oh, they trying to cancel culture, they trying to. Now, these same people, I find it hypocritical, don't want critical race theory to even be discussed, and yet you're trying to cancel the discussion on critical race theory, and yet a month ago you were talking about you were being canceled. Is that hypocritical? Do you find that often funny?
Once again, like I said, three-card monty. So it's never about the issue. So cancel culture simply is, I don't want you to tell these things that I don't want people to know. And that is as simple as that. And cancel culture, you know, before the show started, we were talking about, I love the quote by Maya Angelou that says, you know, when I knew better, I did better. And cancel culture oftentimes is just as simple as that. Sometimes we a lot of times ask the wrong question. And the question we should be asking is, how did some of these things come about to begin with? Not the question, why are we canceling it, but why did they come about to begin with? Confederate monuments and things of that nature. Why did we do them to begin with? Well, people study history know it had nothing to do with the Confederate, with the Civil War. It had everything to do with blacks coming back after World War I, expecting greater participation in America, and during the Civil Rights Movement. That's when it came out. And just really quickly on the Confederate monuments, so those things should be canceled. And the question I ask a lot of my conservative friends that we have this discussion, and it's really a ridiculous discussion. Two things we don't do in America. We don't celebrate treason, and that's what the Civil War, that's what the Confederate generals and soldiers were, and we don't celebrate losers. You don't put statues up to people who lose. We don't do that in American culture, but we've done that, you know, those two things. We've celebrated people commit treason, and we celebrate people who lost, and that doesn't make any sense, and it's completely disrespectful to people who they tried to keep enslaved. So every time that a black person sees a monument, it's traumatic, because we're celebrating someone who is a war criminal, essentially.
Okay, I have to ask you this question because I know you coach basketball for Springfield South, and you also coached at Trotwood. Sports and athletes speaking out on social injustice. Now, I know we've seen this back in the 60s with Jim Brown and Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and there's a few others. Now we see today where athletes are speaking out and using their voices and their platform to basically highlight the injustices that they are speaking on. Can you speak to the fact that these athletes are speaking out now?
Well, Keith, you mentioned the Cleveland Summit, and for the younger viewers, I want to point that out. If you see the photo with Bill Russell, Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and Lou Alcindor at the time, before he became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And Russell and Jim Brown were big name stars, and Lou Alcindor was, you know, the best amateur athlete in the country. But he had a lot to lose by being at that summit because he was an amateur athlete, and they could have taken everything away. But he made a stance, and I think that's so important. And that was great modeling. Once again, 68 Olympics, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, who protested, had their medals taken away. But see, being on the right side of history is important, because now there are statues of those men on their campus. So it's really important to take a stance. I'm proud of people like Ohio's own LeBron James and others. The women of the WNBA have really led the way, and women have really led the way on these social issues, forcing an owner to lose her ownership of a WNBA team. The young man at Ole Miss University who was the instigator of the Confederate flag being removed. And athletes, it's important for them to know their power. I would maintain that if athletes would stand up, so places where racism is great, if athletes would say, we're not taking the field until there are changes made, they would change immediately. I'm really proud of the stance. I think that money got big in the 80s and 90s, so athletes were kind of reluctant to, possibly lose out on that. But they've regained their voice, and athletes are understanding that it's not just about being on the field or the court or diamond, what have you. You are a whole person, and you bring all of that with you to the field of play. So having that voice is really, really important.
Yeah, and I agree. And some people, they always say, well, you're always bringing race into the issue. Well, race is already in the issue. We're just bringing and highlighting what is being done and how folks are being treated. And so when people say, oh, you bringing politics or you bringing race in it, would you agree that it's already there?
It's part of America's DNA, and I love the author of the book Caste, Isabel Wilkerson. If you haven't read that book, it's a powerful book. Talks about how caste has impacted India, Germany, that 12-year period, and then the United States for 400 years. But one of the things she says is, oftentimes, white people say, I'm tired of talking about. Who's really tired of talking about is black people. But we have to talk about it because it's always there. Black people have to do a mental calculus from the time they wake up to the time they lay down. And sometimes we're unaware of that calculus. We always have to be aware of place, where we are. Are we too demonstrative? Are we walking in the right neighborhood? Are we driving in the right way? And that wears you out. And then you think about pioneers. So think of pioneers in the early the mid 1940s, 50s, 60s, people like Jackie Robinson, Nat King Cole. Look up how young they were when they died. And when I was a little kid, I never thought about that. But I would argue that, you look at some of these people, how young they died. It was the trauma that they experienced on a daily basis. Imagine everywhere you go, you're being called the N-word. Black cats are led on the baseball field. You're Jackie Robinson. Nat King Cole had his own variety show. It was taken away from him not because it was unsuccessful, but because white Southerners were outraged that this black man had a TV show. So all these things, these pioneers went through, and then it has continued. So race is just always a part of it. And I would want people to think about this. The only thing that can destroy America from within is racism. There's nothing else that can destroy it. So is race always out there? Yeah, and it's going to be out there because people make it a point. When you have voter suppression, when you have things like this today in 2021, it's not black folks making race an issue. It's racists making race an issue. That is, we would love to not have to talk about it. But because it has to be talked about and because equity has to be fought for, it will continue to be discussed and talked about.
And I happen to listened to some talk shows, and I heard this one announcer, he was rattling on about being woke like it was a bad thing. So I'm gonna get your view on being woke to what is happening today and what has happened, in history. Being woke is not a bad thing. Am I correct?
I would just say being woke is being knowledgeable and desirous of that knowledge. It's not, woke, we've made it a negative term, but having a realization, and I think it's very important for people to have knowledge of self. Knowledge of self helps you not, you're not going to allow yourself to be a victim. You're not going to allow people to run over you. You're going to be professional and respectful, but there's a line drawn in the sand about what you will and will not accept. So if that's woke, I think more Americans need to be woke. But I would say it is just a case of being knowledgeable of where we are as a country and what we need to do to fix what we are as a country.
Right, I agree. I couldn't agree more. I read an article in the Daily News that you did with the reporter, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in that 1919 riot, you stated that your grandmother lost her house in that riot. Can you, give a little brief history about when you also said when your parents were traveling, they'd have to take a green book, and that green book represented places where blacks can stop and stay and eat. And can you give us a little view on that?
Keith, until I became an adult, there was so much my parents protected me from and didn't do that they never discussed. And you mentioned the green book. So we had a green book in the car. We went to probably every historic site in Ohio. My parents were determined that my brother, my sister, and I were knowledgeable about history, and we loved history. But we never spent the night anywhere. And as you become an adult, you realize your parents don't discuss it. My father was a very proud man. He was the first black jail warden in the state of Ohio. But he was a proud man, and he was not going to allow his children to suffer an indignity of someone telling us we couldn't eat here, because my mother would pack lunches, so we would eat and you young folks, the old rest stops were, oh man, they were not what they are today. So we would stop, we'd eat, have a little picnic at certain places, and we didn't go to restaurants when we traveled. My father didn't want to take a chance. So once again, that's that mental calculus, and so you experience that. But as far as Tulsa, my mother was 2. One of my aunts, my Aunt Adele was 7, and my Aunt Helen was 12. My Uncle Clarence was 14, but the boys, my grandparents had a pig farm in Guthrie, about 90 miles away, and but they only had a Native American school in Guthrie that went to like the 7th or 8th grade. So they took the girls to Tulsa and had a house there so that they could go to school. The boys worked primarily on the pig farm with my grandfather. So so it was about a week and a half before school got out that the massacre happened. And you read about things, and I didn't know. My mother never told us, never talked about it. And I had a Black history class at Springfield South High School. Lewis Butler was the teacher, and he talked about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I looked at it, and I was like, I mean, my mom's from Tulsa, and Mr. Butler, that's not. And he showed me the information about it, and I had no idea, and it made me curious and things of that nature. But you think about, so when you ask the average, especially white person, about reparations, they get real nervous. But you think about that, my grandparents lost everything. Should they not be recompensed for that? For that loss? And we don't have to talk slavery. There are hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds of cases where blacks have had their land taken, where they've lost everything. And the expectation is, oh, well, just keep on living. So once again, people are nervous. The people who fight critical race theory, 1619 Project, they're afraid of that information because it is so ugly. One of the things I think about really quickly, Keith, is one of the cases, part of the Brown versus Board of Education case, there was a school district in Maryland, and there were 32 buses that took white children to school, and black children in the same county had no buses to go to school. So the black superintendent goes to the school board of the white schools and says, can we have one bus? We'll take your worst bus, we'll fix it up and get them to school. They said no to that. Could not even one bus. And oftentimes lost in these discussions is blacks were paying the same taxes whites were, for little or no services. And in fact, when the Brown versus Board of Education passed in this county, white kids didn't go to school for 5 years because they refused to be integrated. So that's another piece. A lot of people forget, we lose quite a bit through racism and what we lost through segregation. White people lost stuff too, and many things they didn't even realize. Like those white children didn't go to school for 5 years. So they lost because racism is so cruel. Black people got to see Satchel Paige in his prime. A lot of white folks didn't, so they missed out on that. So racism costs all of us a great deal.
Yeah, I agree. So we have to continue to talk. We have to continue to talk honestly and openly, and so we're not going to let anybody turn us around. I know that's the old gospel song. I'm not going to let nobody turn me around. And that's the way we got to view this thing. And we got to share information like you see on this show here. And, I appreciate, Mr. Carter coming on and giving us, a history lesson. And we understand that. So, share this show with your friends. Share it with your organizations, your churches, because, we have to speak in terms which we understand. And so when people come and they say these things like critical race theory shouldn't be taught on, no, you have the accurate information. You got it right here on this show, which you can discuss it from an intelligent point of view and not just sound bites. So, Mr. Carter, I think we're running low on time. Did I forget to mention anything that you think I should have mentioned?
Well, thanks for your time. Those of you who are readers, 2 books right now, I think, great reads. Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, The Sum of Us by Heather McGee, outstanding books. And the last thing on critical race theory I'd like to say is, you think about, like I said, the genie's out of the bottle, we're not going back, but think about it in these terms. Prohibition caused people to have a greater thirst for alcohol. So banning critical race theory, all it's going to do is cause people to have a greater thirst for information. It's not going to, as frustrating as it is, it's not going to prevent the truth from getting out.
And I agree, and I'm not going to let it happen either. We're going to continue to talk. We may have your back. I said when the virus eased down and we got a handle on it, that when we get back to some normalcy, we was going to have some town halls. And, we are going to have those town halls in the future. I appreciate, Mr. Carter, if you come out and give a lecture, we can fill this church or whichever, and so folks can come in and get some accurate information. This is what it's about, people, sharing information, sharing accurate information, and information that you can use, to better understand whatever issues that are out there today. So, Mr. Carter, I thank you for coming on to the show.
And just one last thing, if you indulge me. Go to our webpage, www.sinclair.edu/diversity. We've got a calendar of events where we have great discussions and things about race and social justice, and they're free to the public. Okay. So we do them on Zoom.
Yeah, okay. Give that webpage one more time.
www.sinclair.edu/diversity. And there's a lot of resources and information, books of interest, movies of interest, but there's a calendar right there on the main page, and you are welcome to register and participate on anything that is on there.
Okay, well, we appreciate it, and we'll have you back. We are going to do that town hall. I'm going to have you back.
All right.
Mark my word. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll go on to the next part of our show. Well, okay, I'd like to thank Michael Carter again. Folks, share this show with your friends. share it at your church, share it at your organizations. Mr. Carter put down some really good information from a historic standpoint, put down some information from a current standpoint. And so, make sure you pass this show along, because we're trying to not only entertain, educate, enlighten, people, so that you can make better decisions on whatever issues that are out there. And if you hear anybody talk about critical race theory, you can come back, with the information you just seen, and you can say, no, it's not that. This is what it is. You know what I mean? So we try to take the research and put it out there so you can have a better understanding of what the issue is of the day. So with that, I'm going to close. Until next time, may God bless you and your family.